Wedding photographers, planners, etc. What's your biggest "this marriage isn't gonna last" story? One wedding I bartended about 7 years ago. The best man was giving his toast and made a joke about the size of the groom's D. One of the male guests yelled out, "She's missing my extra 4 inches." That led to a very awkward silence, and a couple groomsmen had to hold the groom back. I later found out the guy who yelled out was an ex-boyfriend of the bride. I'm wedding video editor. As I'm going through the footage for this one job years ago, it got weirder and weirder. The cameraman asked the groomsmen to say something about the couple while they were getting ready. They each seemed really uncomfortable with awkward smiles. They took turns wishing him luck and providing some cliche advice. Then he asked the groom how he felt. The groom's response was also strange. The cameraman asked, "Are you excited? How do you feel?" He smiled awkwardly and said good. His body language said he didn't want to be there at all. The groomsmen patted him on the shoulder in support, but it had more of an "I'm so sorry" but vibe. During the ceremony their kiss was a brief peck. It was a long time ago, so it's hard to remember, but it may have even been on the cheek. They had their reception in a very fancy, well-known, expensive hall. The room was 2 stories and huge with marble columns. Could have easily fit 300 plus people, but there was less than 100 guests, which made it look strangely empty. There was no fun party vibe for the majority of the reception. The mood was more like an 8th grade dance. The dancing was the most awkward part. During the first dance they kept as far apart as possible while holding each other's shoulders. Both looked like they were being forced to be near each other. Later the groom was dancing with his friends and the bride was dancing with hers. At one part the bride and her friends made what I can only describe as a grinding line. Clearly she had no problems being close to and grinding up on her friends. Then someone physically grabbed the groom and pulled him over to the bride. This guest pushed the 2 of them together and they repelled each other like magnets. They were so uncomfortable near each other. They didn't know how to interact. It was so bizarre. My ultimate guess was that they were both gay and agreed to get married to each other to appease their families or whomever. Or it was an arranged marriage of sorts, though from the interviews it didn't seem that was the case. Either way I felt kinda bad. I wonder what ended up happening to them. Photographer here. I've seen some things. Let me tell you. 1. Christmas time wedding. Groom's family decides they hate the bride's family during the reception. There was a lot of barefoot dancing going on at the time, so the groom's family took the glass Christmas ornaments that were the wedding favors off the tables and threw them on the dance floor. Of course they shattered and everyone got their feet cut up. This couple had been together for 5 years before getting engaged. The bride got served divorce papers less than 6 months after the wedding. She was stunned and had no idea her husband wanted a divorce. The whole thing was so freaking sad. I think about her a lot still. 2. Bride punched out her sister-in-law at the wedding reception. They spent the rest of the evening hurtling random insults at each other throughout the wedding events. Since the wedding was at a remote campground, the SIL did not leave. Bride asked me to please get a few shots up ASAP for Facebook, which I did that night. Received a 1 AM phone call from the groom, furious that I had made him look bad by posting pictures where his hair looked all sweaty. This was an outdoor wedding in Louisiana on the 4th of July at noon. They didn't last a year. I photographed a wedding and I was working with the groomsmen and groom. It was after the ceremony and the bride went off to go fix her makeup. I was probably about 70% done with the men photos when the bride starts screaming and crying, asking why she isn't in any of them. I explained that this was the guy's shot and that the bride and bridesmaid shots were up next. She did not like that answer. She demanded that she be in their shots too. These kind of photos were the ones where the groomsmen are doing the goody things with the groom. She then proceeds to take my camera and throw it on the ground, shattering the lens. She then cries harder and the groom just walks away. I was so petrified. RIP Canon 6D, you will always be missed. I went to deliver a cake and met the wedding planner, looking completely frazzled. I've worked with the woman a lot and we're good work friends at this point. Even though we're technically in different fields, she always has her it together. So I asked her what was wrong. She tells me the groom's boyfriend showed up to confess to the bride that he'd been with the groom longer than she had and they were in love. But the groom got to him first. They were currently sobbing in the groom's suite, telling each other they loved one another and the groom saying he'd never love her like he loved him. She was running interference and trying to keep the bride happy and the mothers both out so those two could figure it out before she had to destroy any relationships. Especially because she got the impression no one knew the groom was gay and they were on the down low super religious hipster white types. The wedding somehow went on. I saw a few pictures. Since the bride included them on her review of my bakery, groom looks miserable while she looks radiant and happy. The wedding planner told me about a year ago that she got a call from the groom's boyfriend to arrange his wedding and he was marrying another dude who basically worshipped him. Which brought up the first couple, who didn't even manage a year, judging from bride's Facebook. Shocking, I know. I DJ'd a wedding maybe 10 years back. Pretty normal wedding. Standard reception. They were kinda kooky, but I thought it was all in good fun. I got the gig through the bride's younger sister, who was a friend of mine. I ran into her later and asked her how her sister and new husband were doing. Not great, she said. Turns out, the day after the wedding, the groom took all the checks and cash they had been gifted and went on a shopping spree. Best Buy, Guitar Center, D Sporting Goods, Re, and other similar stores. Spent like $5,000 in 5 hours. Blew all their money. I don't remember exactly what all he got, but the most ludicrous thing that sticks with me was 2 iPod touches. One for music, and one for audio books. It was all for stuff for him. I think he got her a backpack at Re. She was not into the outdoors. They were both in their mid-30s, with established careers. His reasoning was that this was extra money, and now that they are going to be putting their incomes together, they can spend more. I lost touch with the sister, so I have no idea if they're still together. But if they are, it took lots of therapy and compromise. As a 15-year veteran of the wedding industry, it was whenever the groom's mom tried to control the wedding. I'm not like a pro photographer anymore, but I was asked by a friend if I would, and so as a gift I took photos of the event. Caught the wife making out with one of her bridesmaids. During a wedding music planning session with the bride, groom, and their mothers, a tense moment occurred that didn't bode well for long-term harmony in this couple's relationship. For the wedding processional, the mother of the bride insisted on having "Here Comes the Bride," just as had been played at her wedding years ago. The groom, however, wanted trumpet voluntary, as had been used at his mother's wedding. All 4 of them then started arguing amongst themselves, each determined to prevail. To bring peace to the situation, I simply said, "How about a compromise? I'll play 'Here Comes the Bride' for the processional and trumpet voluntary for the recessional." They all just looked in silence, then said, "Why, yes." Shooting a very fancy wedding at the Boca Resort in Boca Raton. Groom 3x divorced. Looks like George Hamilton. Very wealthy. Recently a great-grandfather. When asked where he'd be going for the honeymoon, he said, "She travels plenty on my dollar, but maybe we'll go somewhere later this year." Bride, less than half his age. Gorgeous. While alone outside the reception before entrances, when asked by a friend how it felt to be MRS, she said, "Oh, it's fine. It's whatever." Notable quote from a guest I overheard: "This is disgusting. I'm sure they're fine." I was the wedding DJ for a couple with large Italian and Irish families. Knew things would get wild when they did patron shot toasts instead of the traditional champagne. Had an idea it wasn't going to last when the cops shut the wedding down after an ambulance carted a girl off on a stretcher who got punched in the face by some dude. This will last 5 months or 50 years. The bride and groom started a food fight during the reception at a military wedding. Pre-pandemic Pennsylvania pro-wedding photographer here with a story that is tangential sort of in this vein. A few years ago, I get this phone call from a wedding client. All names changed, of course. Former client: "Hey, Conrad Erb, it's Jason Smith. Do you remember me?" Me: "Hey man, yes, I do. Been a while, maybe 5 years. How is married life?" "Well, Sandra and I loved your pictures, but things didn't totally work out. But the good news, I'm getting married again." "Oh, whoa, sorry to hear that, but also congrats. I loved working with you for the first wedding, and wanted to see if you could shoot the second wedding down in Florida." "Sure, happy to talk about it. So, who are you marrying?" What's the story? Well, do you remember Nicole? Sorry, remind me. Nicole was one of Sandra's bridesmaids. Oh, really? No kidding. Yup, less than more than. Photographer here. Had a groomsman hit on me all night. Kept putting his hands on me. Told the bride and groom I was getting uncomfortable and they both just laughed at me. Ended up literally following me to the bathroom and started grabbing my boobs and trying to kiss me. Had to throw him off of me and told the bride and groom I was leaving after their dances. 1 hour before I was scheduled to leave. They tried to sue me over it. Now they're divorced. Lol. I'm a wedding singer. One stands out where the wedding was on an unseasonably hot day in our city at a venue with no AC. The time comes to dance and none of the almost 100 guests want to be inside on the dance floor. Understandably, the bride gets up to dance after dinner as we kick off and she is literally the only one on the dance floor. One of her bridesmaids joined her after 2 minutes, an eternity, because she felt bad and didn't want the bride to be alone. We heard through the planner that the bride didn't even want a big wedding. She said yes to husband's desire for a bash. But the only thing she really wanted to have was a band. So she's out here dancing her ass off. With maybe 3 or 4 people at this point. Husband could not be bothered to join her. I keep seeing him walk by, chatting with various people. At one point he has a drill in his hand to go fix something. Basically anything but dance with this poor woman. And to join in the literal only thing that she finds pleasurable about this event. He finally is chatting with someone near the dance floor and she goes over to get his attention. I see her ask him to dance. And he completely blows her off. Doesn't even stop his sentence. Just kind of shoves her hand away. It was so sad. She was so crestfallen that she stopped dancing and went outside. We played to an empty room for another hour and a half. Audio guy here. Groom passed out not once but twice during the ceremony. Like standing there. Gee, this guy isn't looking well. Bam. Groom on the deck. Smelling salts. We get him up. Get him some water and orange juice. Get through the vows and yep. Here he goes again. Not as bad. How about we just sit down on the steps and finish the ring ceremony? The whole time his brother, the best man, is that look like I really should just scoop and run with him out of here. The poor bride has the worst look on her face like OMG what do I do? 6 months later. It was over. This was brought up in a past asking of this question and not me, but whenever the bride and groom are at that moment where they cut the cake and have the ability to smash cake in each other's face, it is not doing it or not doing it. But when one of them decides to do it as a surprise on the other, if they are not communicating whether this is acceptable before the wedding or know the other person well enough to know if they should do this in front of all their family, then likely there will be issues in the future. I edit the videos. I was told by my boss that there was no sparkler exit for this wedding, and to cut most of the ending, because the groom was too drunk and the bride was crying. But I think the groom took something, cause he looked high. Anyway, I don't have a huge amount of confidence in the longevity of that one. Not me, but my sister has shot the same bride 3 times. Apparently, she sends a lot of other business too. Bride pouted through all of her photos because I couldn't magically make 2 hours of photography happen in a 35 minutes we had. She legit wanted 4 locations, all family formals, and wedding party shots done in just over a half hour. From all that I saw at the wedding, it seems like she doesn't get told no a lot. She was a nightmare to work with and the venue's coordinator literally did a happy dance once it was over. Not a pro photographer, but I took photos at a super low budget wedding. It was outdoors, in a trailer park, in Nevada. Right before the ceremony a desert tornado blew right through the trailer park. Nothing big or massive, but it was enough to blow down some chairs, few tables and some tree branches. We were inside when it went through. I'm pretty sure that was a divine sign that the marriage was not supposed to happen. They broke up a few years later because he liked hitting her. My cousin got married. Came to find out he knocked up another chick and told her to get an abortion. Go away. etc. She showed up with her friend at the wedding reception 1/2 months pregnant, hammered drunk and wearing a wedding gown and veil. She hung out for a couple hours drinking and laughing at everyone. South Dakota. I'm not a professional wedding planner, but I was helping a buddy plan his wedding. I used to be a chef that did event planning. I called him to ask some questions. He told me to call his wife because he was on a date. WTF. So I called his wife and told her he was on a date and told me to call her. I don't know what happened after that. Neither of them have spoken to me since. Sorry, not sorry. He wasn't a close friend anyway. He asked me for help and I guess he thought I would lie for him. I hope they didn't get married. I feel really bad for that young woman, but it would have ended worse if I didn't say anything. Marriage celebrant here. A few years back, I was marrying an 18 and 19-year-old who I think tied the knot because they had a baby. Both were massive bogans. The groom's party and his parents turned up, proceeded to throw down stubbies from the eskies and the boots of the cars. The venue owner was having kittens because they were a licensed venue and couldn't have others bring their own alcohol onto site. Didn't deter them, and they got very drunk very quickly. Eventually I went to see the groom's mum to ask her to help stop them drinking, explaining I couldn't marry a drunk person, and his witness also had to be sober. She told me to relax, and that there was no problem with it. Being able to call into question someone's ability to understand what they are entering into is a very big problem here. Bride turns up, sees the drunkenhead show going down, and loses her mind, thinking the groom had to be drunk to marry her. In the end, it went ahead. I had to postpone for 2 hours to force the groom and his men to sober up. I was covered in snot and mascara from the bride sobbing into my shoulder. They didn't even last 3 months. Not me, but a friend was the photographer of a wedding I attended. I later learned the bride was pissed the whole day. Only 2 of the 1,600 plus photos were the bride actually smiling. She was 18 and the groom was 26. Lasted about 1 year. Made the mistake of planning my little sister's wedding in 2018. She didn't let anyone get to know the groom before her wedding. She was specifically keeping the groom's age a secret, but of course the information came out a few days before the ceremony. He was the one to convince her the secrecy was necessary. She was 24, he was 49. They had nothing in common and it was clear she was just the trophy wife. Within a year there were big secrets that came to light. A secret house, bank accounts, a second home in another country, and a secret phone were all discovered. They didn't last long for obvious reasons. I feel bad for my parents that paid for everything. I helped cater a wedding once and was slicing up the cake the bride and groom just cut for serving. The groom asked me if he could lick the icing off my fingers. With his new bride standing right beside him, I picked my jaw up off the floor and hid in the kitchen for the rest of the wedding. The groom's bride is a whore. I play in a wedding event band, and we were playing a friend of ours' wedding. I remember watching the ceremony from afar, and the whole thing was weirdly depressing. Their ceremony featured friends and family giving speeches, and all of the speeches, a truly comical amount, and the vows were all about how hard marriage is. Nothing positive at all. It was hilarious to me. Later that evening I found out the groom confided in one of our bandmates that the part he was looking forward to the most in the day was hearing us play the reception. Truly ridiculous, haha. The first dance song was The Freshman by the Verve Pipe. The bridesmaid's speech included the phrase poke a hole in the condom and the bride's ex's name. I got the groom's face as he turned to his 1-year-old child sitting in the granny's lap. I have photographed precisely one wedding. 1. A neighbor of mine had seen some of my photography work and suggested me for the job. Cool, I was 18. The numbers looked awesome. So I said yes. I'd been a backup shooter and fill shooter a few times, so I knew what I was getting into. It was that wedding that helped me figure out that I would never cut it as a wedding photog. Being honest, if my choices are be a wedding photographer or go to prison seems like a superior option. Less chaotic. That wedding was unlike any I'd ever been to. Even though it was boring stock standard, the wedding was held at a stately property owned by the groom's mother. Practically a palace. Really fancy place. The moment I got there I was presented with a comprehensive list of over 100 shot demands. These were the images the groom's mother wanted. If there's even one of those shots missing, you can forget about getting paid. Sweet lady. Very personable in a sort of she's still alive solely because whomever runs the underworld knows he don't need her in his life way. As the picture guy I was considered nothing more than part of the help, which meant I basically didn't exist. People would run their mouths in my presence like I wasn't there, like I was a photography robot. I heard some stuff throughout the day. One of the groom's brothers alluded to the fact that he'd always wanted to bed the bride and might have a fair shot since she's in the family now. Bride's father was openly hostile to Depit, aka the groom. Bride's sister was trying to hook up with pretty much everybody except the caterers and the picture guy. The collective of ladies from the groom's side tended to see the bride as being way too slutty. Standard issue stuff though. That's all sort of okay though. The families are not the couple. They don't matter and they don't have to like one another or hold one another in high regard. The couple is a core. I still saw that maybe they could make it work. If love is strong, they can endure. It started unraveling from the pre-ceremony shots. They wanted a men of the wedding shot and they were already about half a case of beer into the festivities. Couple guys needed to zizz. Couple more I asked to maybe hold the beers out of sight. One gent didn't know where he'd left his teeth. Standard stuff, I suppose. Emo. Easier to handle since most were a wee tad tipsy. In the ladies of the wedding shot it was like herding kittens. They'd rather gossip and badmouth rather than help me get the shots. The groom's mom and grandma were frustrated at me for my lack of ability to control a group. Not my circus. Not my monkeys. Got through it. The kiss was semi-interesting. She was all in. He was taken aback and off balance. I'm no pro, but that had to be probably one of few kisses he'd ever gotten, and I don't know how you convince a woman to marry you with that little experience. Whatever. I stepped more to his side to try and hide his awkwardness. etc. I viewed my role as simple. My job is to make this train wreck look less like a train wreck. To hide the bad and emphasize the good. Then here comes the groom's mommy with her handkerchief, wiping off the lipstick that had transferred during the kiss. I kid you not. It was like he was 7 years old getting the such a dirty little boy treatment. Mommy licked the hanky and proceeded to clean her boy up. It may be just me being somewhat prudish, but I was thinking there was only one person in the joint supposed to be getting spit all over his mouth area, and it's not mommy. Well, again, not my circus, not my monkeys. The reception was, presumably, sponsored by Grey Goose, Jack Daniels, and patron. By God, they knew how to put away some cocktails. Got about 50 people all getting white girl drunk around the space in the backyard. As things progressed, the more frequently somebody'd take a tumble, the more hammered the groom's mom got, the more domineering she became. Bride and groom are at the display table, side by side to do the cake thing. Mommy shoehorned herself between to help him cut the cake. The golden shot of the blade going in that every wedding album has was his hand holding the knife. His mom's hand wrapped around his to guide, and the bride sort of off to the side like an unwelcome accessory to the process. Like a coat closet on a porta-john. The shot of the bride and groom feeding each other the first bite of cake. Mommy grumped at the bride to put less on the fork because he's not a fatus. This was a recurring thing. If there was a way she could commandeer the space, she did. In editing the shots I also made an interesting discovery. I shot over 1,000 images and groom's mommy was in damn near all of them. It's like she was shot tracking me and everywhere I shot she wanted to go. 950 plus images of just over 1,000 had her in M. Her dress had been 3 clicks nicer, you'd think she was the bride. First dance? Not bride and groom, but mommy and groom. Bride stood off to the side and waited her turn. I still sort of regret not getting one wide shot of them dancing in the way she was firing our lasers at mommy and the man boy she just married. I'd have made so much money in meme profits. It is the first wedding I've ever seen where, whilst the groom removed the garter, he had his mommy coaching him. Silly. Don't use your hands. You're supposed to use your teeth. So, things are winding down and I'll admit I didn't ask a lot about the timeline, so I'm playing it by ear. I start to notice there's no limo arriving. There's no car all decked out with just married and all that. I asked the boss. Might as well see her that way since she'd sort of made herself the central theme of the process. Oh, there's no transport for that. Just go over by that shrub and wait. We're about to do the rice throwing. Huh. Shrub was sort of off to the back of the yard. But okay. Boss said jump. I jump. I see a little girl passing out small packets to a group of people and I'm with it. Got a few candids of people opening their rice packets and it's all good. Bride and groom come out from around the trellis. Mom's not with them. That actually surprised me. They got lit up with the rice, and rather than go to a car, they walked straight to the house behind the mother's house and he carried his bride over the threshold. I got that shot too. About 5 minutes later, Mommy Dearest made her way across the lawn and into that house as well. I got my gear and made my way to my truck, and en route I discovered the bride's uncle puking in the shrubbery alongside the stately driveway whilst a few other fellows and friends looked on in mirth and amusement. If there's a more allegorical description of the entire spectacle, I can't really think of it. The marriage lasted almost 3 weeks, and considering the living conditions and the neighbors, I think that speaks highly to how much the bride wanted that marriage to work. I knew the MILF for less than 5 hours and I was done with her BS attitude. I can't imagine 3 weeks living 40 meters from her house as the woman who stole her baby boy away. Oh, and a couple shots on the list did not turn out. I flubbed the exposure thanks to clouds blocking the light, though I do want to make clear, I missed nothing of importance to the album. Old lady wasn't lying, because I'd failed to get all the shots. She did not pay. It hurts my soul to speak ill of folks, but if I were to start, I might say something that had rhythm with what a itchy runt. Wedding photogs? You are the salt of the earth and demonstrate patience I cannot comprehend. I'd rather have a threesome with a honey badger and a skunk than to know that's why I had to look forward to every weekend. I'm not involved in weddings, but my in-laws told my brother-in-law to it or get off the pot in regard to proposing. I knew then that it wasn't gonna last. He proposed October 2014, married August 2015, divorced February 2016. They were together 8 years before he proposed.